I'm delighted today to be joined by, in some ways, a local author, Bart Van Es, Professor of English here at Oxford, specialising in Renaissance English literature. You're also the author of this year's Costa Prize-winning Biography of the Year and its overall winner. This remarkable book has also just won the slightly foxed Biography of the Year. Bart Van Es, welcome to Blackwell's.
Thank you very much.
Now, outside the realm of your academic interest here as a professor, who are the writers that have inspired you and are inspiring you now?
Most recently, I've absolutely devoured these two big kind of biographical historical series. So Karl Ove Knausgaard's My Struggle series, of which I finished book 6 about 3 weeks ago, and also the Elena Ferrante Neapolitan series. And what I kind of love about them is that ability to kind of focalize an individual experience, but place it in the light of these much bigger kind of cultural questions of what happened in the 20th century, what kinds of political pressures are on people. And they just feel true to life in a new way. It genuinely feels like a kind of new movement to me, so I'm really excited by that kind of work.
The Cutout Girl is a book that works on many levels, and I think this stems in many ways from its structure that narrates not only the story of a hidden Jewish child during the war in Amsterdam, but also that of the wider family, your own family, and society at large, both then and now, and how in many respects the Holocaust touches so much more than the lives of those immediately involved, but in every aspect of our evolving society as a whole. Could you speak a little about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the book is in one way about that huge story of the Holocaust, which has, I hope, defined our ideas of human rights and the importance of understanding the value of democracy and all those kind of things, which have really been so central to our ideas of some kind of Western value system for the post-war period. And on the other hand, it's actually just this very personal story about a family, and we all have family secrets, family rows. And what I wanted was to combine those two elements and to show how something that just seems almost too vast for literature to actually encompass in anything that's not sort of too intimidating and unreadable, to kind of capture something like that in an individual life, as I think Lean's story really allows you to do.
What did you find the greatest challenge to you as a writer in bringing Lean's story to life?
Well, I think there were two things. One was that I wanted to see things from the point of view of somebody who didn't have the whole story of the war ahead of them. For Lean, there really was no start to the war. You know, she was a 6-year-old girl when the war began, and her concerns at that point were much more with the relationship between her parents and what food she liked. And even when she then had these terribly traumatic interventions, like the need to flee to a completely different family, her thought wasn't about the war. It was about, you know, strange new arrangements about where you went to bed or what kind of food you ate there. So I wanted to do something that would allow you to see things from that very to the minute perspective, which is why I ended up using the present tense for Lean's voice. At the same time, I wanted to combine that with that wider sort of panoramic sense of what made the Netherlands such a compliant country during the time of the occupation. So there was a structural challenge. I think there was also a difficulty, I suppose, as a 46-year-old man to write the story of a woman and a young girl, and it includes sections, you know, of sexual danger for her, for example, and those were very, very difficult sections to write. I wanted them to be incredibly truthful, but also, you know, you have to be very careful not to write something that in some way romanticizes that kind of experience. So there were some quite difficult judgment calls there, which certainly obsessed me as I was writing the book.
It seems to me an important part of what you wanted to achieve here is some kind of understanding of the nature and implications of forgetting, and the questions this poses when we try to articulate who we are, where we're going, and the values we say we embrace. Could you speak a little bit more about your thoughts on this?
Well, the first sentence in the book is, "Without families, you don't get stories." And when Lean said that to me, as she did within about 5 minutes of my meeting her, I didn't fully understand what that meant. And I think it actually took the whole process of investigating her story for me to fully understand it. I mean, the most obvious meaning of it is that, without people who care about you, who can laugh at the same things as you, who can cry over the same stories, you kind of don't really exist. And what Lean lost in losing an entire family was not just a set of individuals, but was also really an absolutely central part of her own identity. And the way that she remembers the war has a kind of almost mathematical precision to it, in that the less contact she had with other people, the less she remembered. So the early parts of the book, for example, the moment where she was collected at the door by a member of the resistance and taken to my grandparents' house, and then having to adjust to that set of family relations, that's incredibly vivid to her. She remembers the jokes, she remembers what the carpets were like, all sorts of rules that were given to her. And then later in her story, when she's actually older and you'd think her memory might be better, spectacular things like the evacuation of the little village of Benecom where she was, where they were kind of being shadowed by Allied bombers and things like that. That is a complete blank. And she said that at every stage when she moved from one family to the next, which happened 9 times in all, she said she cried, proportionately half again, because she just had far less connection with people. She started actually seeing things in her memory in black and white. And that's really one of the things I'm trying to get at with that title, The Cutout Girl, because she just kept being, pasted into a new background where she really didn't fit.
Another aspect which I think you bring to life very well, and I think touches on this, is the struggle to articulate an understanding of damage in the emotional life of individuals and society, and how as humans, especially in the thick of trauma, we lose language for this, and how it isolates us and then increases the scale of those wounds we suffer as a result. Was this central to doing justice to Lean's story?
Yes, I mean, Lean is incredibly articulate and perceptive herself about child psychology, which makes her this very rewarding subject to study, aside from the horrors of her own experience. She worked later as a child social worker. So the way that she could think about how, as she put it, for her, there were no fences anymore, no boundaries. Once she felt that people didn't care about her, she didn't care about herself anymore. She didn't think that her opinion mattered, that ultimately she didn't think that her life mattered. And for me, as a lesson, I think that aspect of engaging with Lean changed me the most. I think I'd always been a pretty ethical person and a very rational person, but I'd not had the capacity to really understand people who felt irrational, who felt like they didn't really have a moral compass. And I think Lean at a certain point just didn't have a moral compass, and that was partly the result of her not feeling that people cared.
In a book like this, where you write with extraordinary clarity and immediacy of many events that you yourself were not part of, but have built up an understanding through extensive research, how do you manage the balance between truth and fiction to ensure that you're reaching that deeper truth?
I wanted the book to be entirely true, so I made that decision early on, and it meant some difficult things in relation to the family. Members of the family were worried about what I might reveal, because it wasn't a simple story of rescue. On the other hand, I also wanted the book to be compelling and to read like a novel. So where Lean didn't remember things, I had to depend on research that I did into other people who'd been in those circumstances, and that took a lot of work, just finding out things like, what kind of tins of food were there available and all those kind of things. I'm honest about those interventions in the book, and I wanted that to be part of the reading process. So often you'll find that the book sort of says, I've had to make this up. And I like the way that actually comes as a bit of a shock to the reader, because it again connects with that strange, almost amnesia that Lean herself suffered psychologically because of the trauma she was under.
Can you tell us a little bit, just a little, how you work and your daily routine in writing?
Well, when I wrote this book, it was very different to any other academic writing I'd done before. It was almost a sort of method acting. I was totally in those moments with Lean. I would listen to the audio again and again, read my notes, and then just partly using things like Google Maps, walking down those same roads and placing myself in them. And then I wrote it pretty much without cutting anything out. I sort of very much worked away at sentences, and then when they were ready, I'd sort of move on to the next. So yeah, I was in a real bubble, and I'd come down having sort of spent a day writing, and I'd still kind of be in, you know, the place in IJsselmonde or the streets of Bennekom or something like that.
As a last little question, what's currently in the bedside pile for you to read next?
Well, I've just started reading Mann's The Magic Mountain, which I'm enjoying hugely, and I'm reading quite a lot of work in translation at the moment. So Hesse's Bead Game is there. Also planning to read Isherwood's Farewell to Berlin. So yeah, 20th century stuff seems to be invading my consciousness in spite of my best efforts to remain a Renaissancist.
Bart Van Es, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.